Item 9.10 is the rates modelling. Is there an update to this report? Go ahead.
Through the Mayor, an update to this report and responses to informal questions were sent out today, and copies of these have been provided to you in your yellow folders.
Councillor Peet wishing to move?
Yes, Your Worship. In relation to the elected member session the other evening that we had on this subject, I move that we go for the Model C. Is it? A, B, C. I think members that are at the elected member session, I think we're in agreement that that was the best way. There was a lot of discussion around this, a lot of discussion from both elected members and from staff. And for those that didn't attend, please, I'm not being critical when I say that, but those who were unable to attend, C certainly reflects what those elected members believe is the best for council and ratepayers. Thank you, Worship.
Thank you. Councillor Greaves wishing to second. Do you wish to speak to that?
Thank you. Look, thank you. I'm happy to second this, and I'd also like to just mention how useful last week's elected member session and workshop was on this particular matter. It came as no great surprise to some of us that attended that we are going to see some increases in valuations, and that will impact on the rates of a number of our residences. So this discussion really went down the path of what is going to be the best lever, or practically the only lever that we can pull as an elected member body to ensure that any impact of those rate rises based on valuations is mitigated in some way. So it is a big change, I guess, in terms of the fixed rate, but it's what we have control of, and it is something that we as a council can also dial up and dial down as required in future years to actually mitigate rate rises due to increase in residential property and other property values. So look, absolutely support this. I hope that you will all do so as well, and I think it's actually a good outcome.
Councillor de Graaf.
Yeah, just the question that I had from before, please. I was asking about if there could be a comparison done that would show charges someone would have had in 1920, 2021, and then, you know, how this is going to look for, you know, an average property. And then the answer I've got back says rates modelling, and it's referring back to 2021, but I was actually asking to see the previous years, just so I can get an actual impact of how this is going to affect people.
Through the Mayor, we provided the average, we provided an example of average property values and rates based on the 2021 and on the three models that were presented in the report. Keeping in mind that in 2021, Council endorsed a 0% rate increase, which meant that for a lot of properties, the average rates payable was very similar in 1920 as in 2021.
All right, well, I'm just going to say that I'm not going to be supporting this, and when I actually did want to ask a question on the previous and debate on the previous option, but unfortunately things just moved a little bit fast, so I'm just going to make it clear here that I wasn't supporting the previous motion. And the reason is why that, you know, if some of our ratepayers are going to be really heavily impacted by this moving forward, that it would be good to hear from them and have some actual options that would assist those people. And yeah, I just don't think there's enough in the current hardship policy that we have, and I've been bringing that back every year, so those are the reasons why I'm not supporting it.
Councillor O'Brien.
Unfortunately, I was one of the elected members that couldn't attend the session, and I'm actually really surprised with what was agreed by the elected members, and I wish I had attended, and I don't expect to go over the discussion and to reinforce how that was the popular position that was reached at that meeting, or that most of the commentary was favourable around that. I mean, I must have a strange way of looking at this, because I look at this from a single parent, a couple of children, a $300,000 house with a $250,000 mortgage, and their fixed rate is being increased. I don't have as much sympathy for people who have a $850,000 house and have no mortgage. They might not have some disposable income, but they've got lots of things that they can utilise for that as well. I don't know if that was the thinking or the discussion, but I came here quite prepared to vote for A in terms of keeping the fixed rate lower. So I'm quite surprised, so I won't be voting for C. That's just the way I've read it and my values and who I think needs to benefit most from these decisions.
Just before we move on, I just want to clarify there were no decisions made at that workshop. Council isn't able to make decisions in workshops, just options presented and discussed. And those options are presented again tonight. Deputy Mayor McMahon.
Thank you, Mayor Thompson, and I thank Councillor O'Brien for raising these concerns. And it was a very in-depth session that we had the other night, so I'd like to take the opportunity now to explain why I too agree with option C here today. The options that we have in front of us very clearly do not increase council's rates coming in. We set a rate increase as an elected body, and that is our total revenue for rates that year. Now, when we change that fixed rate, it doesn't necessarily mean that individual ratepayers are going to be paying more. It's just the proportion of things when you look at what the value a genuine will attribute to. So it's no extra money for council whatsoever. But what this is doing, it is addressing the inequities. So for an example, if I'm a retiree and I live in a house that has a large increase in any one particular year by the Valuer General, not because I've put a new pool in, but just because they've deemed my property value to have gone up through natural growth, I might get hit with a very high rate increase. Now, as a retiree, I might not have that income that will go up with it. Just because my property goes up doesn't mean that my ability to pay those rates also go up. Vice versa, if I'm a low income or a single parent and my value goes up in my property, it doesn't have to be starting at a high rate. It might be a $250,000 very modest home. If it gets a steep increase to $300,000, $320,000, then I'm going to be hit very strongly unless these fixed charges stay at a higher rate. It gives us more flexibility, and actually you'll find it protects them a lot more. So the benefit to council and what we have in our pocket is zero. The value of equity through the system is hugely improved by option C. Thank you.
Councillor Bray.
Thank you, Mayor Thompson. I wasn't going to have all that much to say on this one, excuse me, but I just want to follow on Councillor O'Brien and Councillor McMahon. Councillor McMahon makes a good point. What he's talking about are people who are, through in a sense no fault of their own, asset rich but income poor because they've had a big valuation rise in their property, and he's talking about giving them a little bit of protection or relief. But in the scheme of things across the city, that only makes a difference or matters at all on the assumption that there's quite a differential change in values. If everybody's property in the city, due to the Valuer General's actions, went up exactly the same amount, then Councillor McMahon's argument is not quite as strong. Assuming everybody's property in the city goes up exactly the same amount, then by increasing the fixed value, the fixed section of the rating value is you're actually making it a little bit harder on people in low value properties relative to high value properties. So I guess there are two competing interests here. There's the one interest saying that we'll have a base assumption that people in low value properties versus very valuable properties are people with lesser means and might struggle to pay their rates, which is on average not an unreasonable assumption, versus the other problem where some people who are income poor and through no fault of their own become asset rich may struggle to pay their rates. However, where should your sympathies lie then? I guess in one sense the people who are asset rich, when they decide they don't need their house anymore, are probably going to do quite well. So the pain of paying their rates may to some extent be ameliorated when they decide to downsize. I don't know. So this is for the benefit of Councillor O'Brien. So I think Councillor O'Brien has a point, and I've made this same point every year in relation to the impact of the fixed charge on ratings. So I'll just be interested to hear what other people have to say, and maybe I'd like to hear what staff have to say if people ask questions. Thank you.
Councillor de Graaf, question?
Yes, please. Just a question. So in the questions I got back with the rate modelling that's been provided, so for an average property valued at $295,000 for a model 1, their rates would be $1,300. And then with model 2, it's going up to $1,390, and then model 3, $1,400. So can you explain that then? Am I correct with following Councillor O'Brien's thinking that the option 3 is probably harder on the lower income demographics? And potentially, I'm not sure about asset rich catch poor, but sorry, I won't get into debate here, but yeah.
Through the Mayor, yes, that is correct. What we found in the modelling is that there is a point where some of the lower value properties, as the fixed rate increases, the increase in the fixed rate is what happens when the fixed rate increases is that the rate in the dollar for those properties, so that's the rate that gets times by the property value to come up with the variable component. The benefit in reducing the rate in the dollar is not offset by the increase in the fixed charge. There does come a point where property values increase to a point where that benefit is realised. So as you can see in the answers that were provided to Councillor de Graaf, we took some average property values ranging from $295,000 up to $530, and you can see that at the lower end, as the fixed charge increases, the rates do increase. So in that particular model that Councillor de Graaf is referring to, the rates increase by about $30 per model. When we get up to properties that are valued more than about $450,000, that as the fixed charge increases, the actual the total rate payable decreases.
Okay.
Councillor Greaves.
Thank you. I'm just going to ask a question of staff. So just following on from a couple of the comments around valuations, can you give us a bit of an idea of what the revaluation initiative has resulted in potentially for the City of Onkaparinga? Because from what I understand, it's not all equal. And if you could just unpack that a little bit, it might help clarify.
Through the Mayor. So the revaluation initiative is an initiative that was actually kicked off back in 2015 by the Valuer General. So this has sort of been 5 or 6 years in the making, and there were some delays last year with COVID, with the phases and the delivery of councils. This year, I think there's 23 councils impacted by the revaluation initiative. It's an initiative to bring back values back to a relative level. So let's say you had a house in Onkaparinga Vale, you bought it for $600,000, but for the last 3 years you had $400,000 on your notice. What the VG has been doing is actually been keeping the values relative to that area. So the whole idea of the revaluation initiative, and I think there's something like $16 million provided by the state government, was actually bring those values back to what are true market values. So what we're actually doing is playing a bit of catch up. So over the, I guess the last 12 months, the Valuer General has been out there actually revaluing our city with a focus on prime production and commercial, and also for some of the residential sector with independent living units. So in your report here, you can see, and the handouts that Jade's provided, you can sort of see how the different models sort of manage that shift. So as Councillor McMahon stated, it's actually a net result for council in regards to revenue. It's about who pays. So it's about managing that shift in that rating responsibility.
Councillor Peet, would you like to close debate? Put the motion to vote. All those in favour? All those against? That's carried. Division's called. All those in favour, please stand. Councillors in favour: Councillor Pete, McMahon, Olsen, Jamieson, Tonkin, Greaves, Similiotis, Eaton. Those against: Bray, Brown, O'Brien, de Graaf. Councillor O'Brien. Move to item 9.11, fees and charges 21-22.